Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this simultaneous overview and scrutiny committee meeting. We've got both services and resources here this evening. I am Carol Coburn, and I chair the I chair the services group, and I'll hand over to Kizzy, who will explain about the resources group.
So as we've received apologies from the chair and the vice chair of the resources committee, and therefore as per part 1.4.3 of the constitution, a nomination for a chair was sought from the principal opposition group. In accordance with part 4.1 paragraph 2.4.6 of the constitution, if both the chair and the vice chair of the committee are absent from the committee meeting, the committee shall elect another member of that committee to preside for the particular meeting only. Councillor Zoe Barker-Lomax has been nominated by the principal opposition group. Please may I have a proposer and a seconder? Thank you very much. And the resources committee to agree? Rest of the resources committee. Agreed. Thank you very much.
So we move on. You'll see some of this is a bit repetitious, but when we get to the discussion, hopefully it will flow a little bit better. Apologies for absence, please, and substitution from services, Kimberly.
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Councillors Dave Busby, George Hess and Graham White, and we have Councillor Gemma Long attending as a substitute.
Thank you. Do we have apologies for absence and substitution for resources?
Thank you. We've got apologies from Councillor Martin, Councillor Loughton, Councillor Nicholson, and we have no substitutions.
Thank you very much. Are there any declarations of interest from members of the Services Committee? Please, Kim.
None received prior to the meeting, Chair.
And are there any declarations of interest for resources, please?
None have been received prior to this meeting.
Thank you very much, which brings us on, obviously, to the main point, well, the only point of this meeting, the corporate strategy. When we come to the deliberation, I'd quite like to sort of divide it up. We're going to take questions from both committees sort of two at a time and alternate so that we're all involved in it. But I wondered if we could concentrate in the order that the corporate strategy is set out, so that we have general questions on the vision and what this corporate strategy is for, and then go into the more detailed options, the 5 after that. So, and then obviously anybody who's got any extra questions, we can wash up at that point. But if we can try and sort of keep it to each of the sections, I think it might be easier for us all to follow. So Jenny, I think it's over to you, is it, to present the corporate strategy to us? Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair and members. I'm delighted to introduce the draft corporate strategy for 24 to 2028. The draft you are reviewing this evening is the culmination of several months of intensive work by the executive and officers, and we'd like to invite members of the overview and scrutiny committees to share your comments on the draft strategy this evening. The corporate strategy is the key strategic document for the Council. It sets out the authority's priorities for the next 4 years and provides a focus for our work. At the heart of it is our vision to treat people and the environment with respect and kindness, and to conduct council business in an open, inclusive, timely and democratic way, fair to all residents. To bring this vision to life, we have identified 5 key priorities that will be the focus of all that the Council does over the coming years. These are a more sustainable borough, continuing our progress to net zero and ensuring the environmental impact is part of our decision-making, a more prosperous borough, working with partners to stimulate a green and thriving economy within Waverley, a more inclusive borough, ensuring that our borough is a place where everyone feels welcomed, listened to, valued and respected, decent and affordable homes, using our powers and responsibilities, both as a landlord and the local planning authority, to help local people have access to decent homes that they can afford. And lastly, but not least, a resilient and well-managed council, making sure that as a council, we provide the best possible services, spend public money wisely, and make the best possible decisions in the right way. Beneath each of these priorities are a number of outcomes that provide more specific detail, as well as actions that we are committing to undertake to deliver the strategy. The next steps. The version of the strategy, which has been circulated to members of these committees, is in draft form. The purpose of bringing it before tonight's simultaneous ONS meetings is to invite your comments on the draft. While it is designed up, some elements like the design and the photography are still to be finalized. Your comments and feedback will be formally considered by the executive next week, and following this, the strategy will be discussed at the full council meeting of Tuesday, the 22nd of October. Following formal adoption of the strategy, we will publish an annual delivery plan, and we will track the delivery of the corporate strategy through the quarterly performance report, which is brought to the ONS committees each quarter. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. So we're here as both committees to offer feedback. As I say, if we could just, you have to sort of indicate to Councillor Barcolomas if you wish to talk, and if you would indicate to me, because we'll be keeping separate lists. But if we could keep the first group of questions, or number of questions, I'm not making a statement about the number, on first of all, the introduction, if you like, before we get on to the 5 priorities. So the commitment, the pictures of the borough, and basically the broad overview, if you like, to begin with, of the whole document, and then we can come down into the specifics. So if I could say, perhaps kick it off for services, and then anybody else who wants to talk from services or anything else on that. Jane, do make sure you indicate, otherwise we won't have a clue. So, oh, John Rubini for you. Oh no, it's for me. Sorry. I was being generous, but no, it's mine.
We get there in the end.
Yeah, we will indeed.
It's only
Right.
a minor comment.
Okay, well, I'll take you. Can you turn your microphone off at the moment?
Sorry.
Sorry, I'm just making the list that we're supposed to have so that we can ask questions of both committees at the same time. My general question is, as ever, this is high level, obviously, it's aspirational, it's everything it should be as a strategy. Being sort of fairly, what should we say, sort of boring. My first thought is the resources and the staffing for this. You know, what we have committed to do in this high level document is extraordinary if it all works. You know, we've promised a lot of people, the partner organisations, residents, all sorts of people we've made promises to. Are we sure that we have got the resources, the staffing and financial resources to deliver most or all of what we have put in the plan, please?
I'll take that if that's okay.
Yeah.
So I want to start by just saying thank you for having me. Thank you for having officers, and I want to thank officers, especially Jenny and Robin Taylor and the team as a whole, for pulling all of this together. It's taken a lot of work, which I think shows. I think your question, Chair, is critical. How and I think it's worth explaining what we're going to do with this next. So the point of this, as you set out and as Jenny set out, is to be really clear about the priorities that that we have as a council moving forward over this time period, and the outcomes that we want to achieve. So the specific things that we're going to do. What we're doing now, subject to the council, to this going through full council, is that we're going through the budget process at the moment. The budget process is where we do all our we make the resource allocation decisions. So we will make sure that the budget reflects the strategy. So we start from this and we say, if we want to deliver all of these strategic priorities, what does that mean in terms of our budget decisions? So we will go through that process such that when the budget scrutiny happens, that will be an excellent opportunity to ask again, how is the strategy reflected in the resource allocation decisions that you've taken? Once that process is finished, which should be February 25, then we will move, as Jenny said, and as is set out on page 6, I think, of the strategies, that's page 14 of the documents, we will then move to publish an annual delivery plan. So that delivery plan will be informed by a series of conversations that we have with stakeholders, with residents, with businesses, between publication of the strategy and that point. And we will use that as an opportunity to say, given the strategy, given the resource allocation decisions we've taken, what is it that we're going to deliver over the next year? And we're going to be really clear about that. And that means that we can be, clearly open and transparent about what happens next, and we can be held to account for exactly what we say we're going to do. And the idea is that, again, we will then, as we're doing at the moment, we're reviewing the key performance indicators so that the performance framework that we have can directly be tied back to the outcomes that we say we want to deliver. And again, there should be a clear golden thread between what the strategy sets out, what we're measuring, what the resource allocation decisions we make, the delivery plan that we publish, and the performance metrics that we look at. So all of those things should point in the same direction. That's the plan. And I apologise for over answering, but hopefully that gets to what I think you were asking. Thank you.
No, it's a high-powered plan for a high-powered document, so I hope it all works. Councillor Austin, I've got you from our group.
Thank you. Good evening. First of all, thank you. Clearly, I can see there has been a lot of work gone into this from the officer team, so thank you for that. Just generally, first of all, overall, I mean, I get that it's an aspirational document, but it does, overall, the first bit in particular seems to be quite sort of sunny uplands and rainbows, and I'm not seeing any reflection of, or much reflection of, the actual current position on things like planning, concerns about things like openness and transparency. And I would like to see more of that basis of general based in current position. I suppose what I'm asking for is, there's no mention also of risks here in this document, or acknowledgement of sort of issues that we're facing at the moment as a council. There's not really any of that at all in this document, and I think we need to be pragmatic and realistic with ourselves about that. And just on the initial bit, our commitments to the residents of Waverley, there's a bit here, just to dive in, to be a little bit specific immediately. The last paragraph, we will continue to progress our collaboration with Guildford, adding to the savings we've already made. Well, I think I would strongly dispute that number, and I haven't seen the evidence yet to suggest that, and I would ask that that be removed. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Higgins, and then Councillor Monroe.
Thank you, Chair. I thought this was a very good strategy. Overall, the principles, I couldn't think of anything more to add in terms of priorities. I must admit, personally, I like detail. So I was looking for KPIs and things like that, but my understanding is that will come later on in terms of the annual delivery plan. And I think Pedro mentioned that. I'd like clarification whether that actually comes back to ONS, because I'd like to see that. I would have to just pick up a point on Councillor Austin saying there's no mention of risk. Obviously, I'm Vice Chair of Audit and Risk, and that was a particular interest to me. It does cover it in Priority 5, where it says we'll have a robust approach to risk management, performance improvement and reporting. So that was something I was looking at. It certainly does feature in the report, and it's something we would be looking as a committee to push as well.
I was assuming that we could do sort of all the questions and then get sort of answers. Is that okay, Pedro? Fine. Shall I take Councillor Robina next and then one from your committee?
Thanks, Chair. Overall, I think it's a very, very good report. It's aspirational, I think it's inclusive, and it sets it out well. I have a disappointment though, because when I looked at paragraph 12, 16, 17 and 19, I couldn't read much in it for Hazemere. For whatever reason, we seem to be out on a limb and we don't get mentioned like the bid. I know that's partly Chamber of Commerce that didn't go in for it. However, what I'm concerned about is that my community will not get into some of these. We're also very isolated. When you talk about learning and the rest of it, then it means transport because we don't have the facilities in Hazemere. So does that exclude a certain amount of my community from the teaching and the other bits and pieces? So although I think it's a very good report, I would like to see it beefed up so that when we get into the detail, places like Hazemere, presumably Cranley and some of the other villages, we make sure that they are inclusive for those that haven't necessarily got transport. And I know there's talk in the government at the moment about putting transport into the local authority, which presumably will be Surrey. So I would like some sort of answers to that at some point. My other very minor thing is on the first page, the corporate strategy. I see we've got 3 pictures of the High Street plus something from Cranley, which personally I thought they might have been better off with something in the High Street as well. I don't know where that commemoration is.
Jenny did say that the photographs have not been finalised, so I'm sure we can take that statement. Over to you, Zoe.
Councillor Munro.
Thank you very much. Yes, a lot of work's clearly gone into this and I broadly support it. Strategies are necessary, but they are just the first step, of course, and look forward to delivery plans which flow through this. And I do hope we can stick to this strategy. And which is not always the case. I do have a number of comments as we go through, but the main comment I had, I'm a convinced unitarist myself. I think our current structure, Surrey County Council, 11 boroughs, Lord knows how many parish councils, is wasteful, expensive and doesn't deliver the services it ought to. I'm really pleased that we have a strong and growing partnership with Guildford. I hope we can progress that as fast as we can, so it becomes a unitary council in the southwest of the county as soon as we possibly can. And I would like to see that aspiration, not in those exact words, because I recognise there are very strongly held opposing views to that. But I hope we can have some sort of nod to those of us who think that's a good direction to travel.
Thank you. Should we ask Pedro then to comment on that section and then move on? As I say, you can always come back if you suddenly remember something later. It's not a problem.
Thank you, Chairs. So I've tried to write down all the questions and just make sure I'm in a position to answer them. So Councillor Austin first. So in terms of savings or otherwise, so that's page 3 of the strategy, page 12 of the, if you're looking at the document as a whole. That is obviously part of the leaders forward, so represents the leaders' perspective. I will note though that we will hopefully have the report from local partnerships on the benefits, costs, disbenefits, so the sort of net position of the collaboration by the end of September. So hopefully we'll have an evidence base for a statement of some kind before this comes before full council. So I don't want to kind of prejudge anything, but whatever, we will have an evidence base by the time this comes before full council. So hopefully that can be a question of evidence rather than a question of opinion. In terms of the other point about reflecting the council's position, I think that's a really good point, and I think we'll take that into account as we look through the documents as a whole. To Councillor Higgins, absolutely yes. KPIs, critical element of this. If we're going, I think the administration's been really clear that this is not about, a vision statement and then onto the shelf. This is about establishing the strategic framework for the organisation as a whole. So this will drive the decisions that we take around resource allocation, as I mentioned earlier, but also we will judge ourselves against this. This is about, we should be in a position to determine, are we delivering on the strategy, yes or no? And there should be a clear golden thread so that we are able to say to residents and businesses and stakeholders, this is what we said we're going to achieve. These are the outcomes we're going to achieve. This is how we're measuring them. You can look at that on a regular basis. And here is how we're, allocating resources so that you can see how every pound ultimately goes to deliver these outcomes that we said we'd deliver. So you and others should be able to hold us to account. And yes, that will be the conversation that hopefully we can move to be having through committees. So yes, I think is the answer to that. To Councillor Rubini about Hazelmere, I think Jenny has messaged me to say she specifically wants to come back on that, but absolutely, this is a strategy for Waverley as a whole. So that means every part of Waverley we want to make sure that this applies to. So there's absolutely no judgment on one or another location. And I'm stealing all of Jenny's lines, so I will go to her. Actually, I'll go to her now because she's waving. Jenny.
Thank you, Pedro. So first of all, on just to go a little bit more into the KPIs, I will be bringing the usual quarterly performance report to both ONS committees. I have advised the chairs that it'll be, although the data is accurate, it's the data for Q1, the format in which it's being presented is a draft format because the corporate strategy has not been finalised yet. So we've been working at a more informative format for the report. So I'm presenting a trial format, which I welcome your comments on. So I will present the Q1 data this month, and then in Q2, when I bring the data, we will have reviewed all the KPIs and align them with the finalised and adopted corporate strategy so we can report on exactly what we're promising to deliver and how we're performing against that. In terms of Hazelmere, I did think that we had made sure to include, because it was something that I was clearly aware of. So I will go back and check on that. And if it's not included, we will make sure that it is included. But it was something that we were very aware of, that all parts of Waverley are an important part of the strategy. Thank you.
And I'm conscious we haven't picked up Councillor Monroe's comment as well, so just not going to comment on sort of the unitary element of it, but just to say that but just to say that welcome your comments on the document as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Pedro and Jenny, for coming back on that. Can we move on then to priority 1, the sustainability, a sustainable borough? And could we seek questions from both committees, please? Oh, well, in the absence of a question, while you think, the one thing that really I thought was missing was the local nature recovery network, which I'm, very, very keen on. When you come to the your biodiversity, there's working and, promoting biodiversity and nature recovery. And there's various ways that you're going to do this, but I didn't see much about being an active participant in the local nature recovery network, which is up and running with Surrey County Council leading it. And, you know, I'm very sceptical, I'm afraid, about some of the biodiversity objectives and the way they're being delivered, not here, but, you know, across the country. But, you know, we have got an issue in Surrey with the fact that we fragment all our land. And we haven't got any mention here of corridors, as far as I could see, correct me if I'm wrong. You know, it's not enough just to have habitats. If you haven't got corridors for the species to migrate, then they die. And that's all sorts of species that don't fly, presumably. So, you know, we really do need to think about that. So I was just, I think nature recovery to me is vital. And I just hope that, you know, it is just an oversight that we are going to be really an active member of that with Surrey. Does anybody else have any questions? Oh, right, good.
Councillor Munro.
Yes, really, following on from Carol's view, there is a new project which is just starting up, which is called something like Heathland Connections. That's what its aim is, actually to connect all our heathlands. And maybe a sentence here to say, hopefully, that this borough strongly supports it would perhaps be nice. It's always very easy, of course, for us to suggest adding things, but really it should be one in and one out, I think. Otherwise, this will become like a Bible.
Councillor Higgins.
I was very pleased to see that one of the objectives was to install electric vehicle charging points in council car parks. I think that's a great initiative, not only in terms of achieving our priority there, but in terms of just, you know, making it more sustainable, helping the environment. I appreciate it's probably too early to say, but I was wondering whether the vision is actually for the council install and maintain and potentially use it as a revenue stream. It might be small, or whether it's a vision that actually we'd outsource that to a third party to manage and install.
In the absence of any questions from the committee, can I just ask about air quality across the borough? You know, we've got a general thing monitoring it. I'm aware that this is something that's been coming to my committee for months, never actually getting there. So if I could just have an update on air quality within the borough, is it getting any better? Is it getting any worse? And what are we going to do about it? Monitoring it doesn't really help, obviously. It just tells us the story, but it doesn't actually tell us if it's getting any better. Anything else on the environment and sustainability before? Back to you.
Councillor Weldon.
Thank you. I welcome the broad thrust of this. I'm particularly pleased that we are indeed committed to being carbon neutral by 2030. My question concerns an issue that we've been wrestling with in the Haslemere local climate team. And that is, it's one thing to say we want the council to be carbon neutral. But what actually do we mean by the council? Are you referring specifically to the town council and its offices? Have you given any thought in this to the people that we work with, the suppliers to the council? Thank you.
And no, I'm not taking you. Any other questions from the committees before I ask Pedro to answer the questions? Thank you. If you would, Pedro.
Thanks. It was just a quick one. In terms of more sustainable and having obviously green spaces, the expansion of the AONB is a key thing, a key part of the planning aspect of that, and it's not been mentioned in this document.
Thank you. So if you can add that to your answers, please, Pedro, that would be very kind. Thank you.
Great. I'm going to lean on Jenny and Luke, and I should have before I realised that in thanking officers, I hadn't specifically named Luke Harvey, who has done a lot of this as well with Jenny. So apologies and thank you for being here, Luke. I will, if you don't mind, I will start on actually Luke and Jenny will do the majority of this, but I will just pick up the point on 2030. On 2030, the target is it's specifically about, so to Councillor Weldon, it's specifically about the emissions produced by the council. So, you know, I think that's defined broadly, but it doesn't mean all emissions within Waverley. So we're not expecting the borough as a whole to be carbon neutral by 2030, just the emissions that we ourselves produce. So that's the definition and against which we'll be measuring ourselves. On air quality, I was going to pick up as well. I'm not sure if colleagues have the latest exact position, but that given that that is an explicit outcome that we want to achieve, that is one of the things that we'll pick up in the KPI reporting. So you will have a regular answer to that, Councillor Coburn. Who wants it? Am I handing over to Jenny or to Luke? To Luke.
Thank you. Yes, I'm happy to provide some information on the biodiversity point that was made. I think it's this is also links back to Jenny's point and Pedro's point around corporate key performance indicators for the council. So clearly, Waverley is the custodian of large areas of public land through the countryside and indeed in parks. And what we're looking at doing is quarterly reporting on the hectarage that the council looks after and the prevailing priority habitats that exist within those habitats, and to report on activities to improve, restore and create new habitats. So thankfully, a lot of the work has been done by bodies such as Natural England, and I think the particular point around corridors is really salient because, as we know, biodiversity and ecology is important that habitats, there's linkages between the two. Natural England maintain lots of publicly available open data that we can use and overlay that with the land that the council owns, and we can work out total hectarage. There's a lot of work going on there, and which will form the basis of a key performance indicator. There's also a data set called the Living England data set, which establishes where those linkages may well be best placed, and that should inform our decisions around land management. So that's something we're working with colleagues in Parks and Countryside on, which is great. I don't have the data on air quality management at the moment, but leave that with us, and perhaps we can provide a written response to the committee on the latest position around that. And the council, so the strategy commits the council to continuing to deliver on the climate change and sustainability strategy. So part of that strategy is reducing the council's net emissions, which includes scope 1 and I believe scope 2 emissions, and 3 as well, which is so scope 1 is more direct, scope 2 is more indirect, and 3 links to suppliers and all that sort of stuff as well. So that's very much in scope. Thank you.
Councillor Davison.
Thank you, Chair. Following up on Terry's question, Pedro, I'm still very unclear as to what is actually included in our carbon neutral objective. You know, you could outsource all our activities and we'd be very quickly carbon neutral. So I would like to see that our activities include those which are outsourced to third parties. For example, waste collection, maintenance of our housing stock. This may come about when we look at the detail of the plan to deliver against that outcome, but it would be helpful to ensure that there is a well-defined aim and a well-defined coverage for the carbon neutral objective.
We do have a plan for it, Councillor. You know, so, you know, this is a separate plan. So, you know, to mean we've got to link the two together, but they are separate plans.
Yeah, but to my mind, and it's maybe because I haven't been looking at it in much detail, I do not see what exactly is covered.
Thank you. Can we just take the last two quickly and then get on to the next question? You can always come back at the end if something doesn't get answered. So, Councillor Austin, I think.
Thanks. It was just on that carbon neutral by 2030 thing. I suppose it's important that we're pragmatically carbon neutral by 2030, not at any cost. And I'd like to see maybe that reflected in the wording. Thank you.
Councillor Munro.
Yeah, sorry, I should have mentioned this earlier. I'm the council's representative on the Farnborough Aerodrome Consultative Committee. There's going to be big changes in the management of the space above our heads over the next few years. The southeast of England, of course, is a very busy. The air above our heads is extremely busy, and it will always remain so. And some of our residents are acutely concerned about the environmental impacts that has, noise, carbon, all the rest of it. It's not going to go away, but I wonder if we could have something to the effect that Waverley Borough Council will play an active role in managing the airspace above our heads. To minimise the effect on residents, something like that, recognising that an awful lot of our residents actually depend for their economic well-being precisely on our airport. So it's not a question of banning all traffic or anything like that. It has to be a balance, but many of our residents think that balance is a bit tilted towards aerospace at the moment.
It's making sure, isn't it, that, you know, that they're listed in the people that we're going to talk to when we're dealing with any of this, you know, that they mustn't forget Farnborough Airport as well as the other local associations.
Heathrow and Gatwick.
Pedro, can we move on to the next, or have you got some final comments on that?
Just a couple of comments, if that's okay, Chair. Just to Councillor Davidson about definitions. So we are including Scope 1, Scope 2 and Scope 3 in our definition of carbon neutrality by 2030. Scope 1 means direct emissions from sources owned or controlled by the council. So that's our office buildings, our vehicles and so on. Scope 2 means indirect emissions. So that includes things like the gas and the electricity that we purchase. So things that aren't produced directly by us, but which we utilise. And Scope 3 is kind of indirect emissions from the supply chain. So that would include things like waste collection or what have you, which is our the people that we contract and utilise. So I think we're doing what you want us to do, and that is already in our carbon neutrality action plan. But I think if there's something else, then happy to pick that up outside of the meeting if that's easiest. I will also note, and this is a general point that hopefully will be helpful for this conversation as a whole, what the strategy does not do is set out exactly how we're going to achieve each of those outcomes. I think that is really important, because the point here is to set out what we want to achieve without binding ourselves and our suppliers for the next few years about how we achieve that. And what that allows us to do is follow up with conversations with stakeholders and residents and businesses to say, if this is what we're trying to achieve, help us think through the best way to achieve that. So, you know, we're not trying to bind ourselves to specifics on some of those issues, and that is intentional, and we will have more kind of specificity in each of the delivery plans as we move forward. So that's kind of the way that the model which this is intended to operate on. Thank you.
Thank you. I think this is the point, isn't it? We all want to see the delivery plan working alongside this, because we can see what you're aiming for. We don't quite see how we're always going to get there. We move on to priority 2, the more prosperous borough. A little bit shorter in some way. I'm sure people have got questions on this. Oh, Councillor Keith.
Thank you, Chairman. Looking at the outcome for all residents to have access and skills training across the borough, I'm a very great believer in apprenticeships. I think they're absolutely amazing. They're far better to learn in a workplace than sitting in a college or whatever. I think it's a brilliant idea. But the one concern I have is that businesses now have reduced work staff, especially after COVID. So how are we going to encourage businesses to take on an apprentice? I mean, years ago, it was a totally different thing. You know, so many businesses had apprentices that it was amazing. But now you don't see so many. And I'm just hoping that we can encourage businesses to take part in a scheme like this, because it is so needed.
Councillor Higgins.
As I have 3 young children, I've obviously got a vested interest and was delighted to see that there's a delivery of a new play area strategy in terms of planning for ongoing maintenance and refurbishment. I thought that's fantastic. But my main focus was really in terms of the prosperity of the borough and supporting businesses, which obviously is featured there. One of the big things for me just personally is I would like to see the council give a commitment in terms of looking to utilise suppliers within the borough as much as possible. I appreciate that's not always feasible, but I think that we should be looking at a focus in spending our money within the borough, you know, making, you know, improving businesses within the borough. That in turn will eventually hopefully create jobs and maybe feed into the apprenticeships that Councillor Keane mentioned. So that's just my observation on priority 2.
Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you. No, it's very encouraging that this document talks about how the Waverley and the towns and villages are thriving, and that's certainly the case. But fundamental to that continuing actually is the provision of proper infrastructure. Actually, the businesses and the villages, towns, and won't thrive if there isn't proper infrastructure, and that's a big problem. And I think this priority needs to be linked to the development of proper infrastructure. An example in Farnham. I mean, Farnham is 32% of the borough, however you measure it, and we have this Farnham infrastructure project going in partnership with Surrey and the town council and Waverley, and I think projects like that are fundamental to the prosperity of the borough. So I don't know how we incorporate that, but I just think that's important that that is recognised. Thank you.
Councillor Rubini.
Thanks, Chair. I don't want to go heavy on what I've already said. However, this priority 2, as well as picking up on the BID, when you look at it, we've got 6 paragraphs here, 3 of which all talk about the business improvement districts, which we at Hazlemere don't have. Now, what we need to do, I think, is either we're going to have to invite Hazlemere along to some of these meetings so that we understand what's going on and don't miss out, or do we do it the other way and perhaps Waverley tell us what's happening so that we can somehow communicate to our community what they're missing out on and improve it. My own thought as well is that, is it possible to get a dedicated officer from Waverley to liaise with town and parish councillors? We've often criticised Waverley at Hazlemere because we don't get to know what's going on a lot of the time. And it may well be this is an opportunity to actually, with something like this BID and other prosperous areas, to bring in a dedicated officer to make sure that places like Hazlemere understand what is happening at the centre. Because our community often say, oh, that's Waverley, nothing to do with us. And I'd like to try and break that.
Councillor Austin.
Thank you. I mean, I generally support the goals. I would like to see what we need to understand is the mechanism for delivery. How do we physically attract the businesses? It's very light on that. Well, it's not there. It just refers you to the economic development plan, and it's all about that at this point, isn't it? That's what it's about. How we do it. Secondly, this outcome, Waverley's towns and villages are thriving. I completely support what Councillor Higgins has said, spending a lot of time in these playgrounds myself too, but I wouldn't put it at the top of the list of what it is that makes my village thrive is how good my playground is. It's very important, don't get me wrong, but I think business in district, supporting businesses, making sure that infrastructure, we're supporting as a council infrastructure provision within the villages and towns, and it is more important. So it's a polite request to put it at the bottom of the list. And then finally, in the villages, I'm dealing with issues of crime, and supporting crime and trying to reduce crime, I think, is a way that you help the towns and villages thrive. Working with the police, there's no mention of that at the moment in this. Thank you.
Councillor Weldon?
Thank you. But my first response is actually to endorse completely what Councillor Rubini was saying about the supporting the bid groups in Farnham and Cranley. We don't have a bid group in Hesmere. That's not a big problem. I mean, the reason for that is the businesses themselves chose not to be involved, to go for the bid, because they feel that they have their own functioning chamber of business. All we need to do is to add to this text there that to cooperate with the bid groups and also with the chamber in Hesmere. We need to be fully inclusive, as we said earlier, of all the towns. My second observation, and it's a bit odd one, is that under prosperous borough, we have two references to things that refer to health, and I'm not quite sure what that has to do with prosperity. There's a reference to, where are we? Yeah, I just want to leave that at that. Thank you.
Before I ask Pedro to comment on all of those questions, I could just make a little carb, which I always have with play areas. Can you do something about government policy, if it's national policy, to stop us having to put a play area next to a recreation ground? I cannot see the point of having a new build, tiny gardens, which is not the best things for people with families, and a local area of play and a local equipped area of play, because we have to. And across the hedge, you've got a recreation ground with everything on it. So, you know, if this could just have some common sense as to where and what we put in our own parks and playgrounds, I'd be very grateful. I just think the whole thing is nonsense, and an oversupply of stuff that just basically gets abused and eventually rots away. So Pedro, if you could answer, please, anything on the prosperous borough.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, councillors, for all those comments. So a couple of quick things, and then I'll hand over to colleagues as well. Just to pick up that point on parish councils and bids, I think really one of the key things, themes that comes across the strategy as a whole, hopefully, is the fact that this is not just a strategy that looks specifically at the things that the council you know, has the primary ability to do. This is also about, and really powerfully about, using our power to convene. So that means being clear about some of these are things that we deliver by working with stakeholders and with partners in order to get the results that, you know, to get the sorts of outcomes that we're describing here. So absolutely, we want to make sure, to Councillor Rubini's point, we want to make sure that we're working with bids, we want to make sure that we're working with parish councils, and we are really keen to make sure that we see success across the borough. So, you know, where we don't have a bid, like in Hazelmere, we will find another way to make sure that we are talking to businesses and we're talking to communities so that local concerns are picked up. And I think that's a really critical point that we will make sure comes across more clearly in the strategy. So thank you for raising that. There's a couple of other points that I want to pick up. Oh yes, suppliers. I think it was Councillor Higgins who raised this point about making sure that we, where we spend kind of within the borough. Our procurement policy. So, you know, it's difficult because we've got the strategy in front of us, but there's some other documents that are kind of relevant to a lot of what is in this. Our procurement policy is really clear that we do weight the location of the supplier, and there are two reasons for that. Firstly, because we recognise social value in our procurement, so there is a significant social value in using a local supplier because it's creation of employment opportunities. There are kind of secondary effects in terms of kind of putting more money into the local economy. And as an economist, I will tell you that there is a subsequent multiplier. I would also, we also recognise the fact that if you use a local supplier for physical products or what have you, you're likely to have lower emissions as a result of that. So from an emissions perspective, there is a benefit to using local suppliers as well. So both of those reasons enter the calculus when it comes to our procurement policy. So that's already there. But what the strategy affirms is that that continues to be our plan, and we continue to want to use every lever that we can in order to support our local economy. To Councillor Austin's point, it's really it's really important that that we don't kind of see each of the priorities in isolation, or that this is kind of proscriptive as opposed to prescriptive. Hard to pronounce the difference between those. But just because something's in here doesn't mean that, you know, we're not going to do it. But you're right to flag this is supposed to be a statement of our priorities. Safety and safety of the borough comes under priority 3. So it's probably worth just saving that point for us to have that conversation in the in the priority we're about to come to. Jenny and Luke, can you guys, oh, actually, no, sorry, infrastructure point. Yes, really important that we recognise the need for infrastructure across the piece. There is some, you know, we have SIL, the Community Infrastructure Levy, as part of our planning approach. So that is one way in which we can focus on that. Another way is playing our part in the conversations with county and others to be really clear about what we need, and continuing to represent the position of our businesses and communities, which again we can do best where we're engaging with in partnership with them and we understand what they need. Luke and Jenny, what have I missed?
Thank you, Pedro. So the only point I have a comment on is the point that Councillor Keel raised on skills training and apprenticeships. And I would really agree with that apprenticeships are really fantastic. And we do have Waverley Training Services, which is part of the council. And if it hasn't already started, I know it is going to be part of the strategy to see how we can grow that service and encourage businesses and make them aware of that skills levy that they have available to them, and just try and encourage the number of apprenticeships that we're taking on. Having that service available within the council, I think is fantastic. So, yeah.
Thank you, Jenny. We've made a very ambitious promise to our residents who want training, so let's hope we can deliver it. But I, you know, do appreciate the work of the Waverley Training Services. On to inclusivity. Anyone got any questions for Pedro? Priority 3, the inclusive.
Councillor Higgins.
Thank you, Chair. Priority 3, obviously more inclusive borough, and throughout this, it talks about health of our residents. I appreciate it's actually implicitly relates to mental health as well, especially in respect of the excellent case studies that we see within this report. But I think I'd probably want to see it more explicitly stated within the content of the outcomes that mental health is a priority for us.
Councillor Keane.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm looking at supporting vulnerable residents to access leisure facilities across the borough. Certainly, you know, Hazelmere, we don't have a huge amount of leisure facility in that sense for the elderly to actually access. I mean, they might go swimming, whether or not they play squash or whatever, I don't know. But we don't have a huge amount. I mean, our Hazelway Community Centre does a fantastic job with a lot of the leisure facilities. But apart from that, you know, it would be very interesting to know what other facilities you have in mind for these vulnerable people, plus the fact that they have to get from A to B, and you know, they may not be able to afford to go. That's another issue, really. So it's something that I would like to see expanded on, really. Thank you.
I think that's a good point. I was involved in a loneliness project in Farnham, and we had no problem at all with activities, but it was the people accessing the activities. The transport was the key to it, rather than the actual activities. So it is a big issue. Any other questions on this one? Councillor Rubini?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, this is an old age problem with vulnerable people in their houses that we are unable to contact. One of the things I was sad to see is the way that Meals on Wheels, as it used to be called, has slowly declined. And I don't think the service is actually running in this area now. I don't know why. Part of it is cost, I know. Part of it probably is because of at one time, the food they were serving was not good enough for them, but it meant the social contact from at least one person every day, where they could rely on seeing somebody, which at the moment, a lot of these elderly, vulnerable people who are locked away in their houses don't. Now, I'm not saying Meals on Wheels is the answer, but perhaps you could think of some sort of service like that where we're visiting the old people, or neighbours are visiting the old people, or something, so that they get a visit and we get feedback as to what's happening.
Councillor Munro.
Thank you very much. Yes, outcome, our borough is safe and clean. Just remind me that there's lots here, rightly so, about our ambitions and the way we want to improve, and who would argue with that. But we mustn't forget that the primary way which our residents interact with us is they get their bins emptied once a week, and I believe we're pretty efficient at that. Frankly, I've not had any complaints for months and months and months. I hope I'm not an outlier there. So there needs to be something, I think, that makes sure that the sort of the mundane operational tasks, we don't take our eye off the ball. We make quite sure that we don't let standard drops. And I would also add determining planning applications swiftly and effectively. I'd add that to that list as well.
Thank you, Councillor Keane.
Thank you. Just going back to Meals on Wheels, I do understand what Councillor Rubini is saying about the Meals on Wheels service, because I know that, you know, as the representative to Hazelway, you know, they thought long and hard about stopping the Meals on Wheels. And one of the reasons was that the expense overrode the amount of people that actually use those meals. And it was down to about 9 at one stage, 14 at best. But I think one of the things that has happened is that, you know, a lot of older people now, they use their microwave, they have meals delivered. And so they didn't really want the meals from the Meals on Wheels service. Now, I do agree that it does find lonely people or vulnerable people. But, you know, one of the things that came across from COVID was that so many people were found through, you know, the need for their medicines to be delivered or something like that, or food to be delivered. And it's a community issue. Vulnerable people are a community issue, and it's all about neighbours. So you know, I can understand the Meals on Wheels issue, but I think it's a whole big issue that needs to be addressed in a different way.
Thank you. For me, I'm just looking at point 3, Pedro, which you asked me to, and I am not sure I would equate the bins with the police. So I would request possibly we'd rethink splitting that bit out. Our borough is safe, and then our borough is clean, because the police have got one little paragraph and sort of say the safety bit there, and then we're going straight into a few paragraphs on bins. So that would be a practical thing. And then just some comments, really. I mean, I agree with you, Councillor Keane, that the vulnerable question it's a really tough one. And I run a charity and we try and find vulnerable people, and the hard bit is identifying vulnerable people. in the first place, and that involves the community doing it. Maybe some acknowledgement of that in this report, because we require the help of the community to do that, and stakeholders as well. And just given my recent experience with the Careline telecare system, when it drops, for the people in Bramley who've got no phone line, I realise now how important that system is, and just would endorse the continuance of it and the importance of it.
Councillor Long, I've got next.
So I have, as many of you will know, only been a councillor for a year and a half, but one of the things that has characterised that time period quite heavily for me has been the interaction with the water companies and the problems that they've had. And looking at this strategy, I'm thinking that our borough is safe and clean is probably the bit of this strategy that speaks to that, if at all. But I was just really wondering, and again, we're having problems in Elstead at the moment. We have a valve problem, and we've got the whole village being brought to a halt by pumping. And I'm interested to know, is that the bit of the strategy that would govern that sort of relationship, and is that how we see that working in terms of the water companies? Sorry, yes.
Okay, Councillor Keane.
Yes, just going back to the vulnerable, I think we are going to have to address that much more seriously now, because after the result today in Parliament, we are going to have a lot of very, very vulnerable, very older people that really, really will need a close eye kept on them. I don't know how this is going to be, but it is something that all of us are going to have to think very hard about, how we help these old people in the coming months.
Right, I think, shall we ask, sorry.
Just raise one thing.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, so I just wanted to, with reference to the paragraph, supporting vulnerable residents to access leisure facilities. The Edge is the only sports centre in Waverley that has loos big enough for hoists for wheelchair users. And if we were to fund a hoist there, we would enable the independent exercise of sport for wheelchair users.
Thank you for that. So Pedro, could you give us a few answers for the inclusivity section?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, councillors. Lots to go there, so apologies if I don't pick up everything, and I'll go to colleagues just in case I haven't. Starting with access to activity. Actually, no. Starting with Councillor Higgins, mental health absolutely is a priority. So we can go over the language again to just make sure that that's clear and reflected. To Councillor Keane and others who raised comments about access to activities. I mean, a couple of points. I mean, first, we have the Access to Leisure scheme and the Waverley Access to Leisure card, which covers all 4 leisure centres. That does give a 50% discount for leisure services to vulnerable people. So I think I'd really encourage and encourage councillors to support vulnerable people where they're not taking advantage of that, to please do so. And as officers, we will continue to publicise that and support people. But it's really important to say that we don't have all the answers, and we're not trying to pretend that we do. Part of the differentiation between the what and the how that I mentioned earlier is exactly about this. So we do want to work, so the right answer in Hazelmere might not be the right answer in Cranley, and it's just really important that we recognise that there are local differences, and we need to treat them as different questions. So it's really important that we can continue to work with communities and with vulnerable communities, and we're able to ask precise questions about what they need, and then we can work out how and whether we can provide that. And the answer might be in the council's convening role rather than in the council's provision role. So we might not have the answer to everything, or we might not have the resources to be able to kind of deliver everything. But these should be explicit choices that we make, working with partners and exploring all opportunities. It's relevant to note that the government yesterday, I think, or possibly the day before, no, it's yesterday, Monday, made an announcement about local authorities potentially taking on bus services. Just to be clear, all they've done is announce the launch of a consultation on changing access to bus services for local transport authorities under the 2000 Transport Act. We are not a local transport authority, so that is not something we can currently take advantage of. But those are the sorts of conversations we want to participate in, because, were the circumstances to allow us, there might be bus services that we could potentially, take advantage of or negotiate or so on. So we are exploring the opportunities that we have, and will continue to do so as they develop. And I think that's a really important point to make. I want to pick up on actually related to that is Councillor Barker Lomax's point about access to disabled users. I mean, I will note that there are local people who have won medals or participated in the very recent Paralympics in Paris, and should be congratulated on their success. And I think continuing to support them is absolutely something we would or support grassroots disabled access to leisure is something we absolutely want to do. But again, we have to be there are limits to the things that we can do, and we will continue to work with community groups to make that as available as possible. To Councillor Austin's point about separating out safety from cleanliness, I think there is we can look again at how that's written, but I did just want to what I was pointing you to was the reference to the Safer Waverley partnership. And the action plan and our role in managing antisocial behaviour. I think you're right to challenge on whether that's brought out enough, and we'll look at that again. But that role, that partnership with the police and the relationship with the police is a really critical one, and it's actually geography helps us here, because it's incredibly helpful that the borough commander is downstairs in the same in the same building. So that is a close relationship at the moment. You made another point. It was also on support for vulnerable people in its broader sense. So absolutely, we will continue those relationships. And Sam Hutchinson and team, I think, do a really good job in that. But yeah, it's absolutely part of our strategy. Colleagues, is there anything else that we should be picking up? Jenny.
So just something else to add on the vulnerable residents at the Services ONS committee meeting in September. There will be an update on the Thriving Communities Commissioning Fund, which I think is going to be launching the next round soon. So I'm sure that'll Sam will speak to more. Sam will present at that meeting more to how we're going to support vulnerable residents through the winter.
Thank you, Jenny. Are you indicating for this one or for the next one, Councillor Weldon? This one?
Before I get to my main point, I've got to just make a procedural observation, please, which was raised in our last planning meeting. The sound system in this room is not of the best, and some people have difficulty hearing. Can I please ask that when we speak to anything at all, speak to the microphone, and that means both in the direction of the microphone and also close to the microphone. When we step aside or talk, look at somebody else, we lose the sound. So please, can we just try that a bit harder? My main point is a small one. The section is called about inclusion, a more inclusive borough. When people speak about inclusion and diversity, we really talk about a whole range of characteristics: age, disability, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, ethnicity, religion, all kinds of things. Now, obviously, in a document such as this, we can't refer to all of them, but can I ask that when we do expand the document, we include a wider range of diversity and inclusion issues? Thank you.
We've had this issue before, and the trouble is, the longer it gets, the more people spot one person that's not on it. So, you know, sometimes you're better to have a smaller, more compact list, but or no list at all. Councillor Keane, you wish to come back?
Yes, just one final one. When we look at the borough being safe and clean, I'm just wondering whether it would be helpful to councillors that the police actually give a breakdown of what's been going on within certain parts of the borough. I know they used to a long time ago, and I'm sure Councillor Rubini remembers that because he was a police officer. But you know, it would be very helpful, especially with antisocial behaviour and so on, to actually know which parts of the borough are, you know, worse than others, let's say, and what they're doing to combat it.
We have touched on that briefly, if you remember, at services. So it's something we can take away and make sure that we chase that out for services ONS, unless anyone's got a better suggestion for that. Can we move on then to decent and affordable homes, priority 4?
Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you. I've said in the introduction to this that in terms of this overall document, I didn't get the chance to say at the beginning, I'm very impressed with the thing, and it's exactly the sort of thing you need. But in terms of this particular priority, I have a major concern about it. I think we're mixing two things together here, which are two different priorities. One is this section, it seems to be mainly about the council's own homes, the ones that we're responsible for, the ones that we're developing. And that's extremely important, and I totally support everything that's said here. But then there's a completely different matter of the homes that we're supposed to produce through working with developers. And that's actually a much, much larger number. And in terms of the numbers that, and very early in the document, we've got some very interesting statistics which we produced, and it's very well done. But there's some other very important numbers actually that relate to Waverley. First is the number 18, that the ratio between average income and average houses in Waverley is a multiple of 18, and that causes all sorts of problems. And another number is the latest government proposed standard method comes up with a figure of 1,374 for this borough, which is totally unachievable, by the way, and the developers have got no intention of ever producing that as a number, because the reason that number is so high is because the government method is supposed to force down house prices.
Can you not go too far down this route, Councillor MacLeod? Can you concentrate on the document?
No, but my point about the document is that this is not really covered in the document. The document actually has a couple of very short paragraphs under priority 4 about working with developers. All of the rest of it is about what we do as a council in the houses that we own, the houses we propose to develop, the case studies about that. And there's this very big thing about the working, our responsibility as a local planning authority to produce this much larger number. And it's not really covered in this document, actually. That's my point, Chairman. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Munro.
Thank you very much. I partially agree with that. We have more influence as a planning authority, arguably, and we will as more houses come down than we have on our own, though both are important. My point is about affordable housing, very necessary. And I certainly agree that should be one of the main priorities. It'd be interesting if we could all agree a definition of what affordable actually means. Incidentally, it'd be nice to have that in the strategy. Housing is not just about affordable. It's about the complete range of housing. Move on accommodation, yes, 4 or 5 bedroomed houses and all the rest of it. If we just concentrate on affordable housing and build affordable housing, then when people move into it and their families get larger and they get richer and they want to move out, they need to move to something else. I mean, that's an obvious thing to do. So I think Waverley, and this is, I quite agree in its construction role, should concentrate on affordable. I don't dissent from that. But in its planning and development role, it should not just concentrate on affordable housing, but across the whole range, and that should be reflected in this document. Like it or not, we are going to be giving planning approval to a hell of a lot more housing than we have in the past, or at least the planning inspectors will, and we need to influence what kind of that extra housing is.
You're certainly right there. Councillor Keane, did you wish to say something? I know Councillor Munro has slightly stolen your thunder.
I totally agree with what you're saying, Councillor Munro, because I spoke to the chairman earlier. There are so many different versions of affordable, and it's difficult to get our heads around exactly which one we're talking about in this document, really. I mean, I agree that our councils building the housing, they are affordable. When you get to developer stage, they are not affordable. In no way, shape or form are they affordable for local people. So I think we need to define in this document what is good and what isn't in regards to affordable housing. So yeah, it's just well done you.
Councillor Austin, did you have a point?
Thank you. I am, of course, supportive of us delivering affordable homes and us developing high quality council homes. I suppose my concern is always about cost. Now, what we are saying will deliver more affordable and passive house and standard social homes. Well, the two things are not always compatible with each other. And I think that needs to be recognised, that there is a cost to delivering those homes to a passive house standard, and maybe is it better that we focus on delivering them. And so I suppose that's the point, isn't it? We're talking about what we're delivering at a cost to the tenant. We want that to be low, but we also need, as a council, to be responsible for the cost to construct the things. And I have not seen that in some circumstances recently, and that's why I'm so concerned that it's not in here. It must be in here. We must be accountable. Secondly, just harking back to my first point about aspirational, I get that this is sunny uplands and this is what we want to do, but we are clearly, we've got problems in these areas in that we are not, for the tenants, we are not necessarily as responsible and reliable a landlord as we want to be at the moment. And should we be recognising that in this report? Because we have to, if we want to aspire to something, we've got to recognise where we are. And finally, I mean, this point again about development and developers not building out affordable housing quotas. Sorry, I can't concentrate. There's people talking in the background. Affordable housing must also, it must be viable for the developer to build it in the first place. Otherwise, they just won't build it out. So we have to recognise that if we want that to happen, affordable housing must be viable housing. Thanks.
Right, I think we'll stop there. Poor Pedro, right, off you go. How are you going to answer all of that?
I'm desperately trying to type just so I remember everyone's points. And apologies to Councillor Weldon, because I suspect you're mostly talking about me when I keep trying to make eye contact with everyone, and I have a quiet voice as well. So I apologise, and I am leaning closer to the microphone to but do just wave at me if I'm getting too quiet. So first of all, to Councillor MacLeod, just to say, I think you've made a really, really good point about the fact that we are there are very different things when we're talking about social and affordable housing, and when we're talking about housing in general. And we are trading across the three of those in this section. So I think we'll look again, if you don't mind, we'll look again at the balance of how we reflect that, and the language that we use to reflect that. Sorry, I can hear myself getting quieter. So we will reflect the language that we use and make sure that we're kind of clear about what we're trying to achieve across those 3 points. I also thought you made a really good point about the engagement, the importance of engagement with government, about the housing numbers that they have set out. I think the executive have been really clear that they are keen to engage with government and to kind of work through how that might be possible, and what government had in mind kind of underpinning that. I have started those conversations with DLUHC colleagues at officer level to understand what their calculus is, and to also reflect some of the issues that we have, because, for example, there are 5,000 outstanding planning consents. So it's not that we don't want the houses to be built, but as councillors have already pointed out, it is not just us who are doing the building, and there is a broader question here about how we can get developers to move forward on the planning consents that they have already been given. So to Councillor Monroe's point about affordable housing and precisely what our definition is, and what we're trying to achieve, we have an affordable housing SPD that sets out in a lot more detail what we're looking for. But to yours and Councillor Austin's point, there's a fundamental negotiation that has to happen based on viability and other things about what we're able to build and what reflects value for money and so on. So we do recognise that point, and we'll look again to make sure that that comes across. To Councillor Austin as well, I know you didn't mean this, but just as a general point to colleagues, a reminder that when we're building social housing, that doesn't come from the general fund. That's a sort of HRA point. I know that's what you were saying, but I just thought it was important to clarify that. But yes, value for money has to be at the heart of all of this, and we're really clear. And again, it comes back to the resource allocation point, because whilst we are setting out a series of outcomes that we want to achieve, that doesn't mean that we suddenly have infinite money to spend on all of those things. There are going to be really hard choices, and there's a series of external factors that will affect our ability to achieve the various things, including kind of government decisions around local government financing. So as we move through this, what's really important is that we have the conversations. We challenge ourselves. We have the conversations with partners and communities and businesses. We challenge ourselves through the resource allocation process, through the budget scrutiny process, to make sure that we are being true to our strategy about in the decisions that we make, but also that is going to enable us to make the hard decisions about, if we spend on some of this, maybe we can't spend on others, or maybe we need to spend in a different way. We are constraining ourselves by making these choices, but that is what we should be doing as a council. We need to be clear about our objectives. We need to be clear about the outcomes we're trying to achieve. Otherwise, we are just making a series of decisions without a sense of consequence. And so this is how we do it. This is how we make sure we have that strategic frame. So I think that's a really critical point to make too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, which moves us neatly on to the final priority, priority 5, the resilient and well-managed council. Who would like to start us off here? Well, I was just going to say, I'll just leap in just before you, Councillor Monroe, because the one thing we haven't really touched on, and it comes up in all of them, is communications for all of this. And it comes in here again in terms of what you're going to introduce. And the whole time, if we are going to reach out, as this document does, to all these people, there's got to be a variety of communications, from the biggest organisations to the smallest group. We have to find ways of communicating what we're trying to achieve. Sorry, Councillor Monroe, I was just...
I quite agree with this priority and the need to work together with other layers of local government. particularly parishes and towns, and that's well covered here, and so it should be. I'm a little surprised that no mention was made of Surrey County Council. I've remarked about where I think County Council should sit, but nevertheless, it's the single most important authority that we have to deal with, and like it or not, I personally am neutral. We need to deal with it effectively and responsibility, and one of our strategy aim actually should be to get on with county, and that's not always been the case in the past, and let's not assign blame or anything like that, but nevertheless there have been frictions which shouldn't be allowed to occur in the future. And I would also say that the police, and that has been covered, I think, by Jane and others, are such an important partner. It should be the strategic aim to work as closely as we possibly can with organisations such as that, while not forgetting the parishes and towns, of course.
Councillor Rubini?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I'm very pleased indeed to see the part on the back page of the council's recruiting, rewarding, developing, retaining a diverse, skilled and motivated workforce. As we all know, the whole crux of this relies on our staff, and we've had a tremendous problem in the past in retention, recruiting and everything else. Now, you did answer in the first place that you believed we'd be able to keep enough staff to actually make sure you drive it. So I would just underline that to me is probably the most important part of the whole document, and I'm pleased to see it in there. Thank you.
Councillor Austin?
Thank you. So maybe I've missed it, but I think a resilient and well-managed council is an open and transparent council, and we are not making comment on that. We must, that's my, you know, it needs to go in nearly all of these points. Certainly the first three. You've talked, there's one mention of transparency in this, strong and effective governance, but I just don't think that it's emphasised enough. Openness of communication, openness with councillors, openness with the general public, transparent governance. Secondly, I would, you will not be surprised to learn that I don't really agree with the outcome Waverley benefits from its collaboration with Guildford. So I'd just like that noted, and perhaps we can save that fight for another day. And then finally, staff costs have gone up by millions of pounds each year in the last few years. Staff agency fees and overall staff costs. So where is the accountability in terms of cost for that? Thank you.
May I just come back if nobody else wants to? I'm a little bit worried about some of the wording on the very final page of this, the council recruiting, going back to staffing, because as Councillor Rubini said, without the staff, we can achieve absolutely nothing. So, you know, it is so important. And, you know, I hate phrases like developing a people strategy. I mean, what the heck is that? I'm sorry, people are people. And when you're in a workforce, you need to have various things which should just be in place. You should have your career path marked out for you. If there isn't one, why you people won't stay. You know, they have to know that there's a point to their learning and acquiring new skills. There has to be constant sort of retraining. There has to be, yes, counselling, monitoring, anything anybody needs. But, you know, a bit of paper called a people strategy just frightens the life out of me. I mean, just treat people well. Give them some reason to stay in their job and want to support the borough they work for. So I know it's because of the slightly, this is the way we have to word this sort of document, but, you know, carry out regular staff engagement activities, including staff surveys. I mean, talk to them, you know, just talk to people. I think we've almost lost the art now. We just think, oh gosh, better do it through IT in some way. Well, back to my point on communications, we have to have a range of communications for everybody. That's residents, staff, partnerships, all these people. They can all be approached in different ways, but it has to be in an appropriate way. Otherwise, you won't achieve what you're trying to achieve. So I just shudder when I read people's strategy. Sorry about that. I have my little rants at times. And you've got your digital strategy, of course. We've got strategy for everything. And again, bring me back to the point, a digital strategy is fine for people that can cope with the digital world. It's a waste of paper for anybody who needs a phone. And I know somewhere it did say that you're going to pick up a phone and talk to people. So as long as we make sure that our communications are suitable for the people they're designed to communicate with, if you'll pardon my English. Would anybody else like to make any comment on this item, or indeed any other part of the strategy? No. Well, in that case, Zoe, haven't got any last minute?
No, thanks.
Pedro, anything last minute?
Yeah, I'll come back on some of those points. Firstly, Councillor Coburn, absolutely agree on the importance of communications. Hopefully, I'll just draw everybody's attention to page 6 of the strategy, so page 14 on the documents as a whole. We are embracing new technology, as I know you're delighted by, Councillor Coburn, and we even have QR codes as well as a link. The point is that we will have what will be available by at the point of publication is we will have a website dedicated to the strategy where we will set out where the conversations, what we're going to kind of follow up with whom. We'll use that as an opportunity to sort of set out progress so that we can be open and transparent, and all of that can be clear to whoever wants to look at it. So we've got a single kind of database is a better word. Could have gone wrong there. Just basically a place where people can go to kind of set out, to find out what's happening and where. Obviously, that is not the only place we will go. We are going to proactively reach out to community groups and partners and so on, themed around each of those 5 themes to kick off conversations over the across the remainder of this year. And I know that Robin and team will be key to pushing that forward, but that is the organisation as a whole who will be moving forward, and the corporate leadership board, which is myself and the strategic directors, have all taken personal responsibility for for pushing those conversations forward. So yes. And I completely agree with you about the importance of making sure that we're not just using one communication method. Really good spot, Councillor Munro. I hadn't noticed that we hadn't mentioned Surrey County Council once. That is obviously an oversight. So we will make sure that we do, not least because officers, constantly engage with and work very positively and constructively with council, and indeed we have double-hatted councillors as well who are present at both. So really good spot, and we will fix that. Councillor Rubini, thank you for your comments on the importance of staff engagement in all of this. I will note that staff were key to pulling this together, and I don't just mean the officers who literally wrote this, but also we have been working with services across the organisation to make sure that we are comfortable that all of those outcomes are things that we all buy into and things that we all feel capable of influencing, even where the sort of priority lever doesn't sit with us. So we are bought into this, and we are clearly bought into this. To Councillor Austin, I think it's really important that we see the strategy not just on its own, but alongside some of the other things that the council's doing. And in particular, we published our staff values for both Waverley and Guildford. And one of those staff values is about being trusted, about abiding by the Nolan principles of public life, which includes openness, accountability, integrity, and so on. So we're really clear that this is a core part of how we will work as an organisation. And on page 23 of the strategy, we set out the fact that we want to be open and transparent. We want there to be regular public reporting and councillor scrutiny across all of this. So really totally agree with the importance of openness and transparency, and hopefully that's reflected here, but we'll look again to make sure that it's sufficiently set out. To Councillor Coburn, I will hopefully not to your ire, just slightly support the importance of a people strategy, where essentially all it means is, what is the offer? It's our way of trying to articulate the offer that we have to people, and then just to make sure that we have the right structures in place to support our people. So for example, we've had conversations about how we can engage better with universities and educational establishments to kind of have a better pipeline to the council, a win-win for students and for ourselves, and that we can establish a pipeline in skills that that we are finding hard to recruit. But we want to be really clear about what our offer is and make sure that our HR is set up to support people. So that's what the strategy is about. And staff surveys, maybe it's because I'm a nerdy data analyst at heart, but I think it's really important that we have a sort of anonymized way of gathering sort of staff views, and sometimes you can see in quantitative form what you can't see in qualitative form. So I try to talk to people, but I'm also very conscious that what people will say in front of the chief exec is not necessarily what they think. So so whilst we want that to be the culture, it's also really important that we have another way for people to express themselves. So it is best practice to have an annual staff survey. It also allows us to benchmark how we're doing in various ways, and I think that's a really important component of the openness and transparency that Councillor Austin spoke about. So please forgive our people strategy. Thank you.
I'll forgive it as long as you tell me it's not going to be emailed to them. At least hand it out to them. It's this complete separation that I find so depressing in modern life. I mean, I don't mind using sort of IT. I thoroughly understand that it speeds things up and it's more efficient, more effective. But there are times when you just have to spend a little bit longer and just be a little bit warmer than, another email with another strategy attached to it. So, but I do appreciate what you're saying, and I do know that you need to, monitor how the staff are feeling. I mean, I do take that point. Right, has anybody got any other final questions for Pedro? Can we, Councillor? Oh, sorry, no, Councillor Higgins.
Yeah, just pick up on that last point by Pedro about surveys. I mean, I don't mind email surveys, but it did come up in the ONS committee meeting that sort of, I think, exit surveys, staff surveys were very much voluntary, and I think weren't anonymised. I definitely think you get more. I think you get accurate results from anonymous surveys, and also I probably would try and make exit interviews mandatory if possible, because again, you're more likely to get honest outcomes as a result. So.
Right, which leaves us just to come to recommendations, which we have to do separately. Both Kim and Kizzy have been writing everything down. I'm assuming that you can turn those into comments that are useful for the executive. Does anybody want to put them into a long list? Are you all quite happy for the officers to put together the comments from both committees? And right, well, because we've got to do it this way, can I first of all ask the Services Committee if you are quite contented for the officers to make a list of all the points put forward and to pass them on to the executive?
And Resources, ditto.
And that concludes the meeting. So thank you very much indeed. Can I thank the officers again? You've been patient and clear, really helpful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair.